We're going to activate on land here. After coding the land, we plus Karn to kill it, and our opponent just goes ahead and scoops it up from there. The issue with playing a Karn onto this board is that it plays into another potential spell queller from our opponent. Hello and welcome, guys. We are here for round 4 with the list that you see on screen. I do have some unfortunate news, however, and that is that the original audio for this match was lost, so I will be doing a replay for this particular round. Hopefully you guys can bear with me on that, and I will see you guys in the games. So we are playing against Tritty here on the draw, sadly, and we are greeted with the following opening hand, containing an amulet, 2 grazers, an explorer, a bounce land, and a land to cast amulet on one. This is actually a turn 2 Karn kind of hand, potentially even a Titan on turn 2 if we draw another amulet and then explore into a Titan, something like that. So there are some crazy things to be had here if we draw correctly, but regardless, as is, we're still playing amulet on 1, and then turn 2 grazer into growth chamber for turn Karn. So obviously this is going to be keep. Our opponent leads on Fetch, Shock, a Hallowed Fountain, cast Aether Vial, and pass. And of course, our turn 2 Karn loves the sound of that. We're going to go ahead and fetch up a breeding pool here and throw our amulet into play. And the Dryad that we've just top decked actually is going to allow us to cast both Dryad and Karn this upcoming turn. So we'll see what our opponent does. Plays a Shacklegeist. This is the one that lets them tap the creatures that we control by just tapping their own creatures. Interesting one. As we untap here, we top deck a Summoner's Pact, but sadly we are one short of getting a Titan into play off of our grazers. We have 3, 4, 5 mana. If we had a third grazer, then we'd be able to pact 4 and cast Titan this turn, but we don't. So we're just going to go ahead and do the understandable thing of getting our grazer into play, making some mana, making some more mana, getting another grazer into play, going up to 5 mana, playing a Dryad, of course, playing Bounce Land once again after cycling our Explorer just to see what we find. And finally, we resolve Karn the Great Creator. Our opponent activates Violent Response so they can get their 1-drop into play here before the Karn resolves, and they do put in a Spectral Sailor, and Karn is good. So here we're going to go ahead and minus. With the Dryad, we have 5 mana very easily this upcoming turn, and that means I am going to get Sky Sovereign here, so we can start pinging down our opponent's board and have something productive to uptick our Karn on. Definitely a very powerful card here, although I will say that getting Sky Sovereign here does not play around 2 particular cards that I can think of. Let me know in the comments what cards you can come up with, but I can think of 2 cards in particular that Sky Sovereign does not play around here, and we'll see if that comes back to bite us. We do get the Sky Sovereign, and we're just gonna pass the old turn here. And our opponent on our instep uses their Shacklegeist ability to tap one of our grazers, and then they go to untap. They uptick their Vial to 2. They shock in a land and think about casting something pre-combat, but decide against it ultimately. They attack with the Shacklegeist and the Sailor, both at Karn, of course, trying to keep our Karn out of play. But luckily, Grazer has reach, so we can let Karn go to 2. And post-combat, our opponent plays Skyclave Apparition. This is going to exile our Dryad and deny us of having enough mana to cast Sky Sovereign this upcoming turn, while also letting our opponent potentially clock our Karn. So this is one of those cards that I was talking about that we did not play around by getting the Sky Sovereign here, as if our opponent Skyclaves away our Dryad, we can't cast Sky Sovereign. The other card that I can think of that our opponent could feasibly have in the main board here is Path to Exile. If they just pathed our Dryad, then, I mean, suppose that we could Summoner's Pact for like a Grazer or an Azusa or something along those lines and still cast the Sky Sovereign, but regardless, those are 2 cards that our opponent could have to interact and potentially put us in the hurt, and our opponent does have Skyclave, which is probably the worst case scenario for our particular choice, so maybe it would have been better to just go ahead and get the explosives anyways. So here we're going to throw our Bounce Land into play and pick up the Breeding Pool, as if we continue to miss land drops, then we're getting nowhere this game. It could be wrong to play the Growth Chamber, considering we can just top deck an Azusa or a Titan and be able to go off with only 1 Summoner's Pact and probably still be able to pay for it, but in the moment, I was thinking that there's no way we're going to be able to pay for double Summoner's Pact, and we just have to hit our natural land drops here. And so I played out the Simic Growth Chamber. We uptick Karn on the Amulet, the plan being to block all 3 of our opponent's creatures, and keep Karn on 3 so we can minus again explosives and blow up the board, and maybe use Karn to do some stuff after that. Otherwise, we'll just be losing our Karn and not getting explosives in the first place, so... I mean, I suppose we could block the Shacklegeist and the Skyclave with the 2 Grazers, but if our opponent has any Lord here, then our Karn getting assaulted by the Spectral Sailor here for 2 damage, down to 1 loyalty left, means that we won't have access to Engineered Explosives, so plussing on the Amulet plays around that, as we can now block the Skyclave. And our opponent leaves their Violet 2, draws a card with Canopy, plays a Seachrome Coast, entering untapped, of course, and a Supreme Phantom. They did have that Lord that I was just hypothesizing about. And so our opponent commits all of these attackers at Karn, of course, and we're just going to go ahead and block. Untap, draw a Dryad, which is not the worst. We're going to go ahead and minus Karn to get that explosives, as that's our best way of getting back into this game, is cleaning our opponent's board, probably of the 2 drops that they have here. And we're going to go ahead, in fact, and play the explosives onto, play our tap land and pass it back, and see what happens here. Our opponent has land number 4. They go to combat, sending the Sailor and the Supreme Phantom at Karn, and then everything else at us. That's 6 damage coming to us. And there is some consideration to block with the Grazer here, but I foresaw an event where our opponent could have another Supreme Phantom or a Draw Captain or something, and blocking with Grazer at that point would save us 4 points of life instead of 3. So I choose not to block with the Grazer here. There's also a possibility our opponent doesn't have any other Lord effects, and we can pop explosives, and Grazer would act as a very good blocker against these 2/2 creatures, so definitely some value in keeping Grazer around as we top deck Cavern of Souls, which of course we'll play, naming Dryad here so that our Dryad can't get counterspelled of some sort. Of course, Spellcaller doesn't care about Cavern anyways, but regardless, we are going to go ahead and just pass the turn here, as our opponent is somewhat likely to flash in the 2-drop potentially, and just playing Dryad leaves us taking a lot of damage in the air, so we need to try to stem the bleeding as much as possible. So we're just going to pass here and plan to pop explosives. Our opponent draws with their Spectral Sailor, and we pass it to them. They play land, go to combat, swing with everything at us, of course, and we're going to go ahead and declare a block on the Spectral Sailor here, anticipating that our opponent might have a Lord to Violin after we pop our explosives, meaning that we would still keep our Grazer around if we block the Sailor in that case, but if we block, say, the Skyclave Apparition, popped explosives, put it down to a 2/2, and then they flashed in a Lord with Aether Vial and made it a 3/3 again, we'd be losing our Grazer, so trying to play around that. And we do go ahead and pop explosives before taking this damage. They draw a card with their Sailor, probably looking for a Selfless Spirit to flash in, but I guess they don't find it. And we go ahead and take the damage and untap. Any untap land here lets us slam Sky Sovereign and start to take this position back over, but unfortunately we top deck a Tolaria West, which we can play tapped, but really we want to be able to interact with our opponent's board, and Sky Sovereign would have been a great way to do that. At least now, any untap land lets us cast Titan, and with Dryad in play, that's probably just game over with the Valakut thing, but we'll see if we even make it to that point. Our opponent vials in a Mariner, which is obviously going to be a little annoying, since our plan was to slam the Sky Sovereign and kill a creature. Now, our Sky Sovereign is not going to even be able to kill any creatures unless we draw an additional land to pay the mana for the Sky Sovereign. It also means that if we do draw a land for Titan, we can't just point a bunch of Valakut triggers at our opponent's creatures, because each of them will get countered due to the Mariner's abilities here, so very problematic. Our opponent goes ahead and draws a card with their Spectral Sailor again and plays another land. Go to combat, attacks, swing with everything. We go ahead and block the Mariner here with the Dryad and the Skyclave with the Grazer, knowing full well that our opponent could still have that Lord that we were talking about, but the upside of getting this Mariner out of play, if at all possible, is very high, and we can't afford to continue to taking this damage, so We actually do choose to block the Sailor here, though, instead of the Skyclave. Again, playing around a Lord, which our opponent is going to go ahead and put in. So at least we get to keep their Grazer around for another block. And we untap and draw Karn the Great Creator, which is not really our savior here. I mean, we have no choice but to cast the Karn and minus for another Engineered Explosives here, and just hope we're not dead. At this point, any additional attacker would kill us, another Lord would kill us, so we're just going to pass it back and cross our fingers. And our opponent has the end of turn Rattle Chains, and this is lethal on board as we block the 2/3/3s and we take 3, 4, 5, 6. So of course, we're going to let our opponent commit the attack here, as after they draw a card. Of course, it's very important when they have lethal on board, because they might tunnel vision into attacking Karn potentially. But alas, no, they send everything at our face, and that is the game. So I will see you guys for the sideboarding just before game 2. Alright guys, so we are here with the sideboarding for game 2 here. We brought in these 6 cards and removed these 6 cards from our main deck. Of course, we're trimming Explore here as our opponent is playing a bit of an aggressive tempo-y deck. Explore is weak to things like, can't remember the name of the 1-drop, Mausoleum Wanderer, which can counter Explore fairly easily. And we're also trimming Bajuka Bog as it does nothing, and 1 Summoner's Pact in case our opponent has something like Ashiok or Aven Mind Sensor, anything along those lines. We want to have fewer effects that are reliant on searching our library, so we do trim 1 Summoner's Pact here. And in turn, we bring in 2 Dismembers to interact with their creatures, Wilt and Reclamation Sage to be able to answer their potential Aether Vials, while not being completely dead if they don't draw the Vial, as Reclamation Sage can still block one of their Ground Pounders, say for example a Skyclave Apparition. That's why we're not bringing in Force, as it's not worth it, in my opinion, to have a card that only hits Aether Vial. And then we do bring in 2 of the 3 explosives here, leaving 1 in the sideboard to fetch up with Karn. And yeah, that is the sideboarding. I will see you guys for game 2. Alright, so we're here for game 2, and we are on the play, of course. And we are greeted by the following hand. We have a turn 1 Amulet, turn 2 Karn kind of hand again. And so, of course, we're going to keep this. We play our turn 1 Amulet and pass it back. Our opponent plays a tapped Hallowed Fountain and passes. So, of course, we're going to Grazer in our Growth Chamber here. Float the 2 mana. Take it back up, play it for turn. Float 2 more mana. Take it back up and slam this Karn. And instead, actually, we pick up the Forest to try to continue making land drop production here, as our draw doesn't have anything like a Dryad or an Azusa, and we know that we're going to be minusing for things like explosives or liquid metal coating, and we're going to need our lands in play for that. So we are going to go ahead and minus our Karn and grab liquid metal coating right off the bat, so that if our opponent doesn't have some kind of threat this turn that we care about, of course, because if they just play something that attacks into our Grazer, then we can still just coating away a land. That way we'll be actually stone raining our opponent every turn instead of just deactivating a land for the turn that we minus Karn for coating. So our opponent plays a Seachrome Coast and a Selfless Spirit. Not a problem, not a problem. We'll just untap, draw Talari West, and commit this coating. We're going to activate on a land here. After coating the land, we plus Karn to kill it. We play out our land drop, and our opponent just goes ahead and scoops it up from there, as they know that they can't meaningfully clock the Karn, and I guess they are convinced that they're not going to be able to win the game with 1 land every turn. So anyways, I will see you guys for game 3. Alright guys, so we are here for game 3. Of course, the sideboarding is exactly the same, as the game 2 is extremely short, which we don't mind, in all honesty. But of course, we're on the draw here, which is a little unfortunate. And we are greeted with a hand of 2 lands and a bunch of interaction, a Grazer to block, and a Summoner's Pact for something. This hand is very interaction heavy, but if we draw the lands, then we already have a Titan ready to go eventually. So we just need to draw some land drops here, but we have plenty of ways to extend the game a bit. That said, we decide to mulligan, as we really are looking for something a little more reliable. If we just don't top deck lands with that last hand, then we're not really going to be able to do anything. So we do mulligan, looking for a little bit of a hand that does a little more. Unfortunately, we're a little slow. We wish this Sunhome was any land that tapped for green on turn 1. Even a Cavernous Souls would be fine. But there's still a possibility we top deck Amulet or an untapped land or even like a green land like a Garenbrig or something. So we'll see. We top deck a Growth Chamber, of course, and we're just going to play our Tolaria West and pass it back. Our opponent plays an Aether Vial and passes it back, and we top deck the second Karn. So we're just playing the slow game here. We play out our Growth Chamber, pick up our Tolaria West, and pass it back. Our opponent has no 1-drop on our instep, which is great for us. They play the third Aether Vial, which is great for our Karns, of course. Unfortunately, our Karn is a little bit slow here, but we will eventually get that one into play. So we're going to go ahead and Grazer in a land drop, make our land drop for the turn, and pass it back to our opponent. Planning to cast Karn this upcoming turn, but sadly, it might be a turn too slow, as our opponent's going to be able to take up a Vial of 3 and a Vial of 2. If this Karn had been on the play rather than on the draw, then we would have been facing down just a lone Rattle Chains on the board with our Grazer to block, but since we are on the draw this game, that actually makes this Karn a little too slow. We'll just hope they don't have the creatures when we slam the Karn, because of course we have to. Our opponent attacks with Rattle Chains, and we choose not to block as we get the read. Our opponent is trying to eat up our Grazer here with their Supreme Phantom, and also because Grazer can potentially keep Karn in play to get a Explosives or a Sky Sovereign or something like that, if we do get to keep the Karn around after the first minus. But of course, we're drawing the third Karn here, so you know what? It's cool. It's cool. We'll throw out this Karn. Our opponent, of course, immediately activates their Vial on 3, and in fact, it's a Spell Queller to answer our Karn, which is a bit of a yikes, but okay. We'll play out our land drop here, the Growth Chamber, of course, so that we have the option of casting Titan this upcoming turn if we want to. We pass it back. Our opponent untaps with all 3 of their Vials. And yeah, Vials on 1, 2, and 3, and not something you see every day. Not that it's great for our opponent, as obviously that means they might be lacking on threats. They go to combat here, and they go ahead and commit the attack. Of course, we're blocking the Phantom as it's free, and we want to keep a Karn in play if at all possible. So we are going to go ahead and just block the Phantom here. And we top deck a land, and the line here is to just go ahead and play a Titan. The issue with playing a Karn onto this board is that it plays into another potential Spell Queller from our opponent. If they Spell Queller our Summoner's Pact, then we can just slam Karn and minus for Explosives and go from there. But of course, if our Summoner's Pact resolves here, then we get to actually cast Primeval Titan this turn. And that seems like it's going to be a bit stronger than just slamming Karn into some kind of counter magic here. So we do go ahead and play out our Titan. And here we're going to search for, of course, the Radiant Fountain and a Valakut so that we can transmute our Tolaria West for a Summoner's Pact, pack for a Dryad and play Dryad and potentially get Valakut triggers with our Windswept Heath to pick off a Spell Queller or a Supreme Phantom, or both maybe. And this way we're getting a bit of life and hoping that we will survive to the next turn, as if we do, then we're looking pretty good. And we'll pass it back here. Our opponent draws with their Canopy. They activate their Vial here on 3 and put in Draw Skull Captain. That one's unfortunate. They untap. They put in a Shacklegeist here, which is threatening to tap down our Arboreal Grazer, unfortunately. They put in a Spell Queller as well. And, of course, this is going to be lethal. They tap down a Queller, and we're looking at 7, 8, 9, 13 damage exactly. So we are dead to Exactsies here. And, yeah, that was the whole match. Maybe we should have kept the first hand that I mulligan in this matchup. Maybe it was just unfortunate that we were on the draw. I don't know. You let me know what you think. And, yeah, that was the match. I will see you guys for the last match. This is Red Face Menace, signing off.